Just a quick apology from me about the meeting invite as well, and having to have two in your diary at the same time. Hopefully it was clear from the email what was going on, but yeah, Imogen, who kindly set it up for me, was the organiser and had all access to all functionality for this meeting, including putting people into breakout rooms, which I want to be able to do. And I was just down as an attendee, so I couldn't use any of that functionality, so that's why I had to do that. So thanks for your patience around that. So yeah, welcome. Just a quick introduction from me. So I'm Dr. Katie Newby. I'm an associate professor at the University of Hertfordshire in the School of Life and Medical Sciences. And I've got about 20 years now of experience in health-related research, and particularly my research has sought to understand people's beliefs and experiences around their own health, and also to develop and evaluate health behaviour change programmes, particularly co-designing them along with the people that they're intended to support at the end. And as you can probably imagine, a key part of that research when I'm trying to understand people's experiences of their health is to interview them about that or conduct a focus group with them. So that's where the qualitative research bit of it comes in. And I've done a fair bit of qualitative research, but latterly, framework analysis has been my sort of method of choice, really, for a number of different reasons. And I'll talk to you more at the end of the training session about what I see as the main advantages of that. I suppose particularly to highlight at this point that I think it's really excellent for multidisciplinary research. It works really well. So, and I'll highlight that a bit as we go through. So this training's come about really because of one particular project. And that is a project to evaluate the impact of changing from typical and usual face-to-face delivery of an exercise referral programme to going sort of virtual or remote as a result of the pandemic. And that exercise referral programme is the Welsh National Exercise Referral Programme. And we've got a number of people present here today who are coordinators for that. We call it NERS for short, the National Exercise Referral Scheme. And as part of that particular project, we wanted to do some capacity building, so to work with people who are delivering the programme and coordinating it in order to upskill them to do qualitative research for themselves, and to carry on the work that we've done with them after we've sort of left and completed the project. So we've got a few people from that team here today, and this particular session forms part of a broader scheme of training for them. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to introduce or allow everyone to give introductions, but perhaps if you just kind of, Carla, Shelley and Elaine, if you all give a wave. So those are the people representing the NERS programme today. And then we've also, I should say that this particular project, this NERS project, is part of an even wider programme of work funded by the National Institute for Health Research, which involves us being given over a period of 5 years successive projects that we as a team are expected to respond to rapidly and conduct high quality research. They're all public health related. So we've got, as part of that wider first, it's called programme of work, we've got a number of people from our public involvement research group, and we've got Abigail, Catherine, Mick, Julia Jones and Amanda representing that group today. So let's say hello, everybody. Give a wave. And then we've also got some first researchers, Nigel, Olajoke, Neil and Caris. And then we've also got researchers on another project who've dropped in to make the most of the training that's happening today. We've got Natalie from our university, and also Christina Pierce from King's College London. They're working on a project around depression in kidney patients. So hello, you two, and you're very welcome.
Thank you.
So the workshop is a beginner's guide, I suppose, to framework analysis. So those who are sort of familiar with it already, I'll be telling you some things that you already know, but I wanted to pitch it at that level for someone who hasn't ever done it before. And hopefully by the end of today's session, you'll understand what framework analysis is all about. You'll have an idea about how to go about it. And in fact, you're going to have a go at a couple of the steps in that process so you can start to become familiar with it. And also you'll understand something of its strengths and weaknesses as well. We'll have a break in the middle because it's an hour and a half long session, so a bit of a comfort break. And I will give you the opportunity to ask questions as we go along. But if you do want to stop me to ask questions, absolutely fine. I want it to be fairly relaxed. So probably the best way of drawing my attention is to use the hand waving kind of feature in Teams. So if you look at the top of your toolbar, you'll see a smiley face with a wavy hand. And if you hover over that, you'll get various things that you can do. And one is to raise your hand. So click on that and hopefully I'll spot you. Karis, perhaps you could look out for waving hands and shout up if I miss anybody. So feel free to interrupt me. I'd rather answer questions as you go along rather than you sort of not understanding and then not being able to build on that understanding as we go through. So I have got a presentation, so I'll just get that up. Can you all see that first slide?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Great. Okay. So actually, I'm turning my watch up so I can keep an eye on the time. So this is a slide that I presented at a PERG meeting recently when I was talking about quantitative research then, giving a sort of introduction to quantitative research. And I thought it was a useful starting point just to bring people's mind back the distinction between quantitative and qualitative research. So in quantitative research, the data is numbers, and the evidence that we would provide in order to describe our findings are statistics. And the approach is very concrete and objective. So providing a different researcher follows the exact same analysis, they'll come out with the exact same results each time. And the kind of questions that quantitative research seeks to answer are how much and how many. Whereas with qualitative research, it's very different. So the data instead is words. And the evidence we use to describe our findings are quotes, so quotes from interviews or focus groups, but they could also be texts from meeting minutes or from diaries or anything like that. And it's very different in that it's described as being abstract and subjective. So unlike with quantitative research, where you get the same answer if you use the same method of analysis, that wouldn't be the case with qualitative research because everybody involved brings their own perspectives, experiences and viewpoints to it. And this type of research aims instead to answer questions like why, what and how. And in some pieces of research, we do a mixture of the two, which can be really effective. So having some numerical data supplemented by the qualitative research to really flesh out those findings. So there are lots of different methods of qualitative analysis, all with their own nuances. Some of the different ones you may have heard of are discourse analysis, grounded theory, interpretative phenomenological analysis, I have to say that one slowly, thematic analysis, and some, but not all, are deeply sort of rooted in something called epistemology. And epistemology, I don't want to labour the point too much, but it is sort of an important point to make. It's kind of like a philosophical position. And as researchers in qualitative analysis, it's quite important that we all understand our own take on qualitative research and our own epistemological sort of standpoint. So epistemology is to do with how we create knowledge, and there's kind of two different extremes to it. So you've got at one extreme the idea that a phenomenon or a thing exists outside of us, and providing we take enough perspectives on it, we can come to understand what that thing or that phenomenon is. And as at the other extreme end of things, it's the idea that there's no true reality and that everything is constructed through ourselves and our own position on things. And most people sit somewhere sort of centre ground, I suppose, that they appreciate that everyone has their own perspectives and views on things and everyone's own interpretation on reality is different, but there maybe is some element of truth that you can get at. And it's something that's quite important to talk about when you're working as a group, where you stand on that continuum. And so the method that different researchers choose to use depends on the aim of the research in the first place and the type of research question that you have, but also any epistemological stances that the individual doing the analysis or the group has. So some of those particular ones that are listed above do have a specific epistemology that you'd only choose those methods if you agreed with that, and others they're not aligned to an epistemology at all, like thematic analysis. And actually framework analysis is the same. It doesn't have a particular stance. So framework analysis is actually a type of thematic analysis where you develop themes that come from doing some initial coding, developing these into broader categories, and then onto the themes, which are the final input of the analysis. But the difference between the two, I suppose, is that the framework analysis is categorized by the application of a framework, and we'll talk more about what that framework is as we go along. It's a highly systematic method of categorizing and organizing data, qualitative data, because of this framework. And it's very flexible. So two new terms, apart from epistemology, are this idea of deductive analysis and inductive analysis. So with inductive analysis, it's also called bottom-up. It's the idea that you start with your data and you develop some sort of theory from it. So you move from very specific observations and try to develop something general from it. Whereas deductive is the complete opposite, so top down, where you start with a theory and then you look at your data to see if that fits within that theory. So you're moving from something broad to something specific. And framework analysis allows you to take either approach or a combination of the two. And it's quite normal, and I usually do it in that way, to have a combination where I might start with for example, a particular theory that I'm seeking to see whether our data fits that, and I code according to that theory, but then I also leave it very open so that new themes can emerge that don't fit within the theory. And framework analysis, as I've already mentioned, is really good when you want to work in multidisciplinary teams, and that's really because it's a very clear step-by-step process that everyone can understand and follow. There's this framework which everybody shares and adds to, so it feels like a joint piece of work, when it indeed is a joint piece of work, and there's a shared interpretation that comes from that framework. Is everybody following so far? Anyone got any questions? Okay, good. Oh, skipped ahead too far. So we've had some new terms: epistemology, inductive and deductive, and then framework analysis has its own set of particular terminology as well. Some of the terminology is shared with other methods, and you might be familiar with it, and some is specific to framework analysis, and I've just put them all on this slide here. And I will go through each of them as I'm talking through the steps of framework analysis. So where you see this icon of this guy with the book, I'm going to describe that or define that particular terminology so you understand it. So here's the first one: data. Clearly not specific to this particular method of analysis, but to say that in framework analysis, the data can be quite broad. So that the usual data for qualitative analysis is the write-up of an interview or interviews or a focus group with a number of participants. So that's the most common one, but it is possible to include pre-existing data, so minutes of meetings or documents. It could be some data that's being created by the researcher. So for the exercise referral program that I talked about, it could be that as researchers we observe a particular session between an exercise professional and a client, and we make some notes on it, and that could be the data. Or the data could be created by the participant themselves. So it could be a diary they've written, or here on the screen we've got an example of a food diary where someone's listed the food they've eaten for a week. So any of those things could be used as data, and in fact they could be used together as well in the same analysis. And then transcription is another term. Again, all different methods of analysis will use transcribed data, or could use transcribed data. So transcription is the process of making a written verbatim or word for word account of the spoken words. And transcriptions have a typical structure. So I think I can. Can you all see that Word document now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a typical transcription. So you can see it's got really wide margins here, so you can write notes on either side. And we've got double line spaces so that you can scribble bits in between. The interviewer is distinguished from people who are speaking by using formatting, and here it's in bold. And then we've got codes for the individual participants. So 1M in my particular example here means participant number 1 and they're male. So we don't use people's names because we always anonymize the transcripts before we begin analysis on them. And also we remove any identifying comments, such as in this example, which is a transcription of interviews with teenagers. They've mentioned the name of their school and also the name of the gym, so they've been removed. So this is a typical transcription and what they look like. Sometimes we include things like ums and ahs and non-verbal communication like laughs. It depends on the type of analysis that's been done really, but in framework analysis, we're mostly just based on the content of what is being spoken. So we typically don't include those things. Right, go back. Oh. Okay. So framework analysis has 7 steps, and I'm hoping you can now, you're back now on my slide. Someone shout up if you can't see that, otherwise I'll just continue. So 7 steps involved, and I'm going to go through each of those in turn with everybody now. Any other questions at this point? Are we all okay? Okay, great. So step 1, well, we've already covered that. It's nice and easy. So transcription. The authors of the framework analysis, or the most recent paper that I like to follow anyway, talk about this first step and how it's useful for researchers to be involved in the process of transcription. In reality, this is often outsourced just because it's quite a resource intensive activity. It takes a lot of time. So for an hour of speech, it normally takes a good 7 to 8 hours to type that up. So it often isn't the researchers that do it, but it can be useful exercise to help the researchers become immersed in the data, especially if they haven't been involved in the data collection. But if it is outsourced, then in the second step, which is familiarisation with the interview or the focus group, then it's possible, of course, to still listen to the audio recording and to read the transcripts along with that. And that's a good way of familiarising yourself with it or reminding yourself what happened if it's been a while since you did the data collection. Also, in terms of familiarisation, it's good to look through the notes that you or anyone else involved made at the time of data collection regarding the kind of context, like what it was like. Was it in a private room where people felt they could speak freely? Was it a friendship group and that we'd gotten very well together, or colleagues, something like, or was it a bit awkward? And did the researcher feel comfortable with the group? How well engaged they were, that sort of thing. And that helps to kind of set the scene and help you to become familiar with the data collection and the data itself. And you can use the left-hand margin, that nice wide margin on the left-hand side, to record any initial impressions or thoughts or notes as you go through. And indeed, that left-hand margin is really useful as you go through the whole of the analysis at each different stage to write anything that really comes up that makes you reflect on something or think about something, because they're useful notes to come back to at the end when you're trying to interpret the data. So at this stage, resist the temptation to start coding, but just immerse yourself in the data. And then the third step is coding. So a code is a label that's given to a piece of text, and that code is relevant or needs to be relevant to the research question. So, and we use the right-hand margin for this. So this could be on your printed out copy. You might just underline the bit that you think is interesting or important to the research question, and then you might write the name of your code. And the name that you decide to give it is entirely up to you, but something that's relevant, given it what the person is saying. And you would just go through and write those codes in that right-hand margin and go through line by line. And you're encouraged to go through line by line rather than just reading a whole sort of paragraph or section, to really focus down on what that person is saying and not to sort of skim read. So the codes can be a number of different things. They could be a thing, something substantive like a behaviour or an incident. But they could also be emotions. They can also be values. So the value that you put on taking responsibility for your own health, or whether you think that's something that the state should do, for example. Or they could be any sort of methodological or important details. For example, the way in which someone has said something could be interpreted in slightly different ways. And so if you've listened to the recording, and you know the way in which it was meant, was it sarcastic or was it serious, for example, you might want to code that sort of thing. Coding benefits hugely from multiple perspectives. So we talked at the start about how you have your own viewpoints and experiences that you bring to something, and that's a key facet of qualitative research. So when it's just a single person doing the analysis, and that's fine to do that, but you need to be transparent about that it was just you, and therefore that the interpretation is your interpretation alone. If you have multiple perspectives involved, particularly when you have people analysing the data, or in fact being involved at every stage, who maybe have experienced a particular health condition that you're researching, or they're a carer of somebody who's experienced that, or they are someone who's delivered healthcare to that person, or supported them in delivery of a public health programme related to that condition, then that all brings different layers of interpretation and meaning and perspective that can be so valuable. And then the coding that will happen will be very different, or could potentially be very different, depending on those different perspectives. So what I'd like you all to do is have a go at coding. So I attached to the meeting invite a transcript. In fact, it was the one that I showed you before, as how a typical transcript is set out. I've also attached it to the chat in this meeting, so that you can just access it from there if you want to, just for convenience. So if you've printed off a hard copy already, then some people always prefer to work on paper when they're doing coding, and that's absolutely fine. I quite often do that myself. So if you think something's important, and I'll go for some more instructions in a minute, but if you think something's important, then underline it and then write the code that you want to give it in the right-hand margin. If you're working on a online or a digital copy, then what I would normally do is highlight the bit that I think is important, and then I would go to the review tab at the top, click on new comment, and then here I would code it like school or something, like that, and that's how I would code it in that way. So in terms of instructions for doing this coding, so I'd like you all to imagine that you are part of a multidisciplinary research team of around 3 or 4 people. And the research question that you're focusing on is, what are the barriers to physical activity for young people? So all the things that get in the way of them being physically active, or that they dislike about being physically active. And you have, imagine you've collected data through a number of different focus groups, and you've decided as a group that you're going to start coding that one of these particular focus groups. So it's been transcribed already, you've already familiarised yourself with the data, and you're about to set about this coding. Now, as a team, you would all do this first coding of an individual transcript independently, and bring, like I said, all your own perspectives and experiences to that. So have a go at coding the transcript that I've given you. Remember that you're trying to pick out barriers to physical activity. So carefully read through line by line. Every time you think you see something that's a barrier to physical activity, if you highlight it, if you're doing it on the electronic version, or underline it on the hard copy, and then write something you want to call that code in the right-hand margin. There's no right or wrong things to pick out here as codes, and there's no right and wrong names to give codes either. It's just about having a go, and I'm not going to pick on anyone afterwards to say, what did you give? So it's all just about your own personal practice at this. So have a little go. As you're going along, if you want to use the left-hand margin also to write anything that just comes to your mind that you think is interesting, you would like to explore further with your team, for example, then do that. I'm going to give you 15 minutes to do this. And then we'll come back as a group and just talk about how we got on, and then we'll have a quick break. I'll leave these instructions up on the screen as well. But has anyone got any questions at this point? No? Okay, so we'll meet back just before 1:45 then. Okay, let me just, I'm going to unshare and then share again. So I can just, 1 second. There you go. Hopefully you can all see those instructions still. How are you all getting on? We've had just over 10 minutes, but I don't want people getting bored because they finished. People like a bit longer, or are you done? Yeah,
I'm finished.
Okay, so we'll press on then. If you haven't finished, it doesn't matter. It was really just to have a go and to have some experience of that. So I'm keen to hear how you got on, whether you found it easy, difficult, somewhere in between, how you found the process. Would anyone like to share their thoughts on that? Amanda.
Take myself off mute. I always do that. I think it's difficult to work out where the actual facts are in amongst the dialogue. So I find it really difficult because it's all dialogue and trying to pick out what the really important things are. And I feel like I've underlined a lot more than what I should have done, perhaps. So that's where I struggle. And I don't know whether it's part of my brain not sort of managing to separate sort of ideas from thoughts and feelings, and I don't really know, but I do struggle with what to underline and what not to underline and why I'm making those decisions. Yeah, that could just be my neurodiverse brain. I'm not sure, because I feel as though I'm seeing too much.
Yeah, because it's in the context of a conversation, isn't it? So people aren't just sort of listing their barriers, they're just talking more generally in response to the question. And so it is sometimes quite difficult to pick out the salient things. I think I would just sort of say, though, that I really mean that about there being no right and wrong answer. If something jumps out at you, then you should underline it and make a comment. And this is what's also a benefit about working in a team as well, that you will then discuss the way that you've coded something, and then it'll bring everyone's viewpoints into play, and then you will refine those codes as a team. So somebody else might agree with you or disagree with you, and together you'll come to a consensus then on whether that should be a code or not. So it's not just you deciding that. And we will go on to that a little bit in a minute about how you do this as a team. It's just initially you do it independently. And it is a bit isolating, but I think if it, like I said, if it jumps out and you think it might be important, then make a note of it. But yeah, good comment, thank you. Mick, did you want to contribute?
Yes, please. First of all, I need to explain to everyone that this is my pet subject. I did a physical education degree, and when I was a teacher before I had my stroke, and I spent a lot of time trying to get not adult girls, they were sixth form girls into PE, because the dropout is tremendously high.
Yeah.
I just wondered going back to the, is there a format if you want to add more on, because like, you don't know if you've seen it, but I've filled up almost a page and a half of the back with extra notes. So that's basically my question. What do we do if we got more notes than there is space, really?
So I would encourage you to be quite strict with yourself in the coding. So to just use the right-hand margin to code things, like giving it one word or a little phrase to describe that code, but use the left-hand margin for thoughts and feelings as you're coding. Okay. But it's really common and great practice to, as you're doing the whole analysis right from the start of collecting the data right through to the end, to keep a reflexive diary where you write anything that comes to mind that you're thinking, feeling, whether you think your own viewpoints or perspectives are coming into things, any initial thoughts to do with interpretation, anything that comes to mind, jot it down. Then when you meet up with your team that you're working with, you can start to talk these things through.
Okay.
So what you've done really on the back, I imagine, is probably what would go into one of those diaries.
Yes, I would have thought so, yeah.
Any other comments? No? Okay. We'll move on then. So well done on that bit. Let's get the right slide back up. Oh, okay. So how are you all feeling? So I've scheduled in a break for this point for sort of 5 or 10 minutes to go and get a drink. Would anyone like to do that? Should we just have a couple of minutes?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's come back at well 10 to. That'll give you 5 minutes. Yeah. Okay. Lovely. See you in 5 minutes. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Right. Okay, on to step 4. So step 4 of 7. This one is developing a working analytical framework. So the analytical framework is simply a list of your codes and nothing more than that. So it's a set of codes that you've agreed as a team or individually if it's just you working by yourself. And each code is usually assigned with a number or an abbreviation, and that's just to help you out when you're then applying that coding framework to your future interviews or your focus group transcript, so that you haven't got to write out the name of the code each time. And this particular analytical framework or your set of codes is developed over time through rounds of coding. And if you're working in the group, also through meetings where you agree and refine those codes. So really your analytical framework isn't actually complete until you've analysed your last interview, because there's always chance really for new codes to come about. Obviously, if new codes do come about, you then have to go back to the previous transcripts that you've already coded and make any changes. So if you've split one code into 2, for example, you'll need to go back to that original code and decide which one of those 2 that it now is. If your codes are conceptually related, then you can group them into categories as well. So on my next slide, I've got an example of something you might have drawn up, or you could draw up for the transcript you've just looked at. So this analytical framework is just a simple table, and we've got the first column is the name of the code that I chose to give something. So one I called school, one I called friends, one I called gaming. So these are all different possible barriers to performing some physical activity. And then I've used an abbreviation of 1.1, 1.2 and 1.3, but you could equally use something different, like just SC for school, FR for friends, or whatever you agree as a team or is helpful for you. And then also it's useful to give a definition or a description of your code. So what you mean by that, and you might want to give some examples of things that could fall under that code as well. And this is to really help you when you're coding the remaining transcripts to be precise when you're coding. And if you're working as a team, it's also particularly helpful to make sure you've got consistency across the team and that you're coding this different things in the same way. So we're having 2 separate activities today. You've done the one already, and then the second one is having a go at writing an analytical framework based on the codes that you've just created. So Amanda, you were talking about sort of not feeling particularly confident about the coding that you were doing, but so now this is the point at which, after having done coded one particular transcript, you'd meet up with the team and sort of say, well, I coded this one as school, but what did you code it as? And someone might say, well, I didn't code this at all, but somebody else might have coded it in a more precise way by calling it homework rather than school more broadly. So this is the point at which you talk this through and come to a consensus. So decide that that's not worth coding, or it definitely is, and this is what we'll all call it. And you develop that analytical framework together. And it's this analytical framework that you would then go on to code the next set of transcripts by. So I'm going to try something that I haven't done before in Teams. So it's fingers crossed it's all going to work. So I'm going to assign you to 3 groups. In each group, there's a first researcher that will help you out or talk you through what's going on. So we've got Neil and Olajoke and Nigel. Thank you for helping out with that. So I'm going to click a button in a minute, and hopefully you'll all go into these breakout rooms. And then in 15 minutes time, I'll pull you back in and we'll have a chat about how you got on. So I've got some instructions again, which we'll just quickly look at. So yeah, meet with your team to discuss the code that you have used when you were doing your coding. Talk about things like which things you've highlighted as important in terms of the barriers, where people have different or new codes that someone else hasn't got, Which different names have you given to codes? Remember to say focus on the research question. It's very easy just to start to find things interesting, but it not be related to the particular research question. So try and stay focused on that, and to agree not to encode something if it's not relevant to a barrier to physical activity. That's a good discipline to get yourself into. And then together agree your set of codes that you would use. If you want to, you can also think about any higher order categories that you put those codes under. And again, you'll have 15 minutes to do this. Again, there's no right and wrong answers, and I'm also not going to, again, pick on people to say what you've done. And if you don't manage to produce a full analytical framework, well, I'd be surprised if you did, to be honest. It's just about having a go. If you only get through the first half a page together, then that's absolutely fine. It's just about experiencing the process of discussing it and sort of seeing how you get on. So everybody keep your fingers crossed this works. I'll drop into each room and see how you're getting on, if I can manage to do that. And I'll pull you all back in 15 minutes. If it all goes disastrously wrong, leave the meeting and join the link again, and hopefully we'll all rejoin. Otherwise, it's lovely meeting you. Right, okay. Here we go. Seems to be taking a little time to work itself out, but okay.
Nope.
I was cut off my point.
You were full flow there. Sorry.
I was,
Yeah,
yeah.
I got cut off.
Sorry, was that all a bit sudden?
Yeah,
I
there's
should have
all
said there was a
people here
10-second
again.
warning, yeah.
People come from.
I probably should have used that announcement feature to say I'm bringing you back rather than just press the button. Oh dear. Right, okay, so how did you all find that? Any comments?
I think we all had similar ideas. The text wasn't so long, so it was probably easier to code than a longer text of similar themes.
Yeah. Amanda?
Yeah, I thought I couldn't do it and then discovered that I could. My normal, oh no, I'm not worthy, I haven't done this, I haven't finished it, oh shit, I'm hopeless at this. And then all of a sudden when I read out what I'd done and whatever, yeah, that's what you were supposed to have done. Oh, okay then.
That's really good. That's a nice thing to have learned. Shelley?
Yes, and also we were quite fortunate that it was only one question we were looking at. It wasn't like a whole load of script there that we were having to go through. So I think that made the exercise a lot more straightforward.
Yeah, and it's quite a specific research question. What are the barriers? It kind of lends itself to some kind of nice, easy coding, as opposed to what are people's experiences of something, where it's a bit more difficult to know where to start with that sometimes. Mick?
I just found that it really showed to me the importance of having a framework to collate information, because everyone has different things to say about the same thing, so to speak. So it's very important to get that framework, I think, and especially when you're comparing it to different groups around the country. I mean, we're just one group sitting here doing this. Yeah,
and hopefully you've got a bit of a feel for not only that you shared your coding, you had similar ideas, that gave you some confidence in what you were doing, but also that there were some differences, and so you realised your own perspectives that you were bringing to it, and therefore the value of working in a multidisciplinary team like this. Because imagine if it was just you, you'd have to feel very confident in what you were doing for yourself, wouldn't you? And you wouldn't have that support of the team, but also you just have that one position that you're taking, and you wouldn't be able to take advantage and benefit from all those different perspectives. So yeah, great. Amanda?
Yeah, I think I was scared of doing analysis because way back when I was first doing patient public involvement work, I got given all the scripts and said, well, you go away and analyse them. So I did, with no training, no whatever, and I came back with loads of ideas, and they said, oh yes, you've got a brilliant perspective or whatever. But it took me forever because I just didn't know how I was doing it.
Yeah,
I think as bad experiences sort of come back, and I think, can I do this? What is this right? I don't know. So.
Well, the nice thing about framework analysis and also thematic analysis is that they both have very, very clear process. So step by step, do this, do that, which does help, and it gives better transparency as well, doesn't it? If you're following a process like that, and therefore more robust as well in the research that you're doing. So we've got sort of 10 minutes left, so I'm just going to rattle through the next bits. Okay. Oh, I don't think you can see my slides now, can you? Let's have a, I need to reshare. Okay. Can you see that now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So step 5 will be then to apply your set of codes to all of the remaining transcripts. So you've got to the point where, as a team, you decide on your coding framework, and then you go off and you code the remaining ones. So you can either do this as a single researcher could be chosen, or volunteer to go and do all the rest of the transcripts, or you could do it, split the work across the team. So someone, you will do 5 each, for example. And obviously that is a sort of better use of time, or you can get through the work more quickly if you're splitting the work. If you're going to do it as a team, there's obviously margin for not for error, because if one person does it, of course they are just doing it in their own way and deciding what the different codes mean, and they, if someone else was to do it, they could have a sort of different idea on whether something is an example of that code or not. But when you're doing it as a group, it's possible that you, even though you've got clear definitions and examples for each of the codes, you might still do something differently and not code something that someone else has, and vice versa. So it's a good idea to make sure that you are all very familiar with that coding frame, all very happy about what all the different codes are and what the definitions are and what counts and what doesn't count. But you can also do a little bit of work to actually give a numerical figure to that level of agreement before you decide to carry on. So you can do work out a percentage agreement by coding a few different transcripts independently with this new framework, and then coming back together and looking at the coding again and seeing how much you agree on how you've coded things. You can also calculate something called kappa, and there are certain scores that show that's an acceptable level excuse me, of agreement. And once you've reached that level, then it's safe to go on and to independently code the remaining transcript with that agreed framework. And that would be quite a robust and good procedure to follow, would be to ensure that level of agreement using that framework and to report that level of agreement in your write-up of that particular work. Does that, is that okay, that step? Anyone got any questions? Might need to shout because I can't actually see you with this. Otherwise, I'll just assume everything's good. And then step 6 is charting the data into the framework. So I said at the start that the main difference between thematic analysis and framework analysis is there is this framework. So this is the point at which this framework comes into play. Now, the framework is a Excel document usually. I mean, it could be a Word document, but when you're dealing with lots of participants and lots of code, potentially, it'd be difficult to fit it all into a table in Word. So we tend to use Excel for this, or at least I tend to use Excel for this. So at this point, when you come to charting, you have gone through all the steps previously. You've got your analytical framework and you've coded every single transcript of your focus groups or your interviews. So all of them are all nicely coded up, and you've hopefully got this high level agreement, so you can be confident that you've all coded them very similarly, if not the same. Now you want to start to bring all of that coding together into a single place so you can begin to make sense of it and interpret it. Because at the moment, all those codes sit within separate documents, don't they? So all those different Word documents of the transcripts. It's about now bringing it all into one place so you can begin to view it as a whole. So this is where the matrix comes in. So the matrix has a particular structure that everybody follows. And the structure is that a single row is a single participant, and a single column is a single code. So you'd have participant 1 with their line all the way across, and then your codes going down. So some of the codes that you might have had in the transcript that we were just looking at might be things like homework or cost of going to the exercise classes, or other competing priorities, gaming, those sorts of things. So all of those codes will be down. And then you'll have your first participant going across, and then in each cell, you're going to write something about what that participant thinks or feels or has an experience of in relation to that particular code. So sometimes that cell might be completely empty because there isn't anything relevant for that participant. That's completely fine and actually tells you something. If there's lots of empty cells for that particular code, it's perhaps not a particularly important code. Sometimes people use separate tabs for each category. So we talked about how the codes could be categorized into another one. So an example, again, for the data we just looked at, could be competing priorities could be the main category. And then that you've got homework, schoolwork, gaming, socializing, things like that. So you in Excel, I'm not sure how familiar people are with Excel, but when you open up a single Excel sort of document, let's say, along the very bottom, you can have lots of different tabs, and there's lots of separate clean sheets that all look identical, and you can name those sheets. So you could have one separate sheet for one category, like competing priorities, and then another separate sheet within the same whole document that is cost of physical activity, and so on and so on. So as you go into each different sheet, you'd have all of the codes related to that particular category and what every participant thinks about or feels or experience of under those codes. Or it could be all in one sheet, it doesn't really matter, but it's just a way of helping to manage the data, is to split it up in those sorts of ways. So charting is the process of putting the data from your individual transcripts into the matrix. But you don't just sort of lift out huge big bits of text. What you're trying to do is, in your own words, to summarise for that particular participant under that particular code. So let's talk about, for example, the schoolwork one. With one particular participant, they might have said, I've got exams at the moment and lots of revision. I don't have any time for physical activity. So under that schoolwork, for that particular participant, you might write a little summary around revision taking over and no time for exercise. And then you might next to it put an illustrative quote. So lift exactly the words that they used. I sometimes put it into italics to distinguish it from my own sort of summary. And then also some people use a key to indicate how good they think that quote is as an example of that code. So here on this slide, I've got QQ or QQQ with the 3 Qs, meaning this is a really good example. And I quite like doing this because it means that when you are putting together your final report and you want to pick out some really nice quotes, if you go down that particular code on schoolwork, you can quickly identify the quotes that are a really nice example of schoolwork getting in the way of physical activity, and then you can pull those out rather than having to read through them all again. So as before with the coding, you could do that as one person could be nominated to do this work of charting, so bringing everything in individually from the different transcripts into the matrix. Or you could split the work across the team. And I suppose if you've already split the coding and part of it, it also makes sense to stick with the same transcripts that you've been responsible for coding and to bring that into the matrix. If you were to do that, so in your team, separately taking responsibility for certain transcripts, then it would make sense, of course, to discuss beforehand how you're going to write those summaries, what style they're going to take, whether you're going to use that QQQ key, for example, whether you can use italics for the quotes, that sort of thing, to make sure that you're consistent in the way that you actually put the information into the matrix. Otherwise it might look a bit messy and you might not all understand when you come to look at it what everything means. So it's important to agree that, but then just go ahead and start to pull things in and to write those summaries and give the indicative quotes. Everyone happy at this point? Shout up. Or shout out rather, if you've got any questions. Okay, I'll move on. So we're nearly there. We're at the final step. So interpreting the data. This is the process of developing the themes. The themes are the final output of the analysis and what you would put in the write-up, so the report or the paper that you're doing. And these are developed by reviewing the matrix and comparing data within and between participants. So it's particularly useful to look down the rows of the codes, for example, and to see the varied different responses or things that people have said and your summaries for each different participant. And you can start to then sort of draw out what those themes are. So the themes would be something that captures something important about what people have said in relation to that particular research question. So there'll be a level of pattern responses, so people saying similar things, but you might also have themes around deviant cases, so pulling out, but this person didn't think that compared to everybody else. This is the most difficult step to describe, I think, because you really need to be in the data and to have data in front of you to kind of and start discussing it to really understand these themes and start to pull them out. But for the data that we just had, you might, for example, pull out themes around barriers being different for males and females, possibly. So that could be a theme around sort of different gendered responses. But you might also have a theme around the change from primary to secondary school as what might be the difference, that transition, and going from an exercise that maybe you have to do to exercise that you don't have to do, and the change from exercise being something that was innately enjoyable and fun to now becoming something that feels like maybe a chore or something that and other things taking priority over that. So those are the kind of things that you might pull out as themes. So you're seeking to not just to describe the data, but really to explain it. And that's the extra level above just describing, is to try and explain it and pull out these themes that are running through the data. And of course, if you're working in this multidisciplinary team, that's much easier to do. And you can bounce off each other and talk about those themes and really flesh them out. And there's something called analytical memos, which can be quite useful. So it's you take written notes about emerging concepts or themes or problems, and to write down what the relevant codes are underneath that, any initial thoughts and feelings of the group when you discuss them, who is it relevant for in your participants, who are the deviant cases, any point of further consideration. And this might become the start of a theme as you start to work it through. And you might add to that analytical memo as you have rounds of meetings and discussions with the team. I'm very conscious of the time. That's the last step, is develop those themes based on the matrix and reviewing that matrix all together. I haven't really got time to talk about methodological rigor, but I just want to say that in quantitative research, there's sort of conventional terms like validity and reliability and objectivity, which are not relevant, or the kind of terms that you would use for qualitative research. Instead, we talk about things like credibility, so how confident people can be in you as a team. Dependability, so this is more to do with are the procedures that you've performed accurate, and have they been performed consistently? And then how confident can we be in the findings? So this is around making sure that you're very reflective as a team, that you've taken different approaches to the answering that question with different types of data, interviewing different types of participants to give their own views on a phenomenon. And then also transferability, which is like generalizability. So to make sure that that you've got a sample where you've got, not that it's not that you can sort of say that your sample is representative for everybody, but that you are managing to capture different perspectives on it, and you've made an effort to capture as many different perspectives as possible. Sorry, my dog's barking. Let me just let her in. Back. So just quickly, some things I like about a framework analysis is particularly the matrix, which allows you to see at a glance the whole data set. It allows you to, like I said, look down the columns to get a real feel for that code and who are different, the variety of different experiences and opinions. It enables you to work well together as a multidisciplinary team. It can handle large data sets because it's all in this big Excel thing. You know, in different types of analysis, like framework analysis, you've got to develop themes from the position of having lots of different transcripts in front of you, like literally on the floor normally when I'm doing it, and they're all laid out, and you've got to somehow pull it all together. But this matrix allows you to have it all in one place, which works really well. I mentioned before about it being a clear step-by-step procedure, which facilitates this confidence in you as a team, performing things consistently and accurately. And I mentioned at the start about how you can use different types of data, so not just the transcripts, but also field notes and minutes and things like that. And you can combine them all together. So you could have a row that's not a participant, but instead meeting minutes, field notes, and that can be incorporated. And as I mentioned at the start, you can do this inductive but also deductive analysis, or a combination of the two together. So you could start with an existing framework of codes right at the very beginning, so you don't do your own coding from scratch, which is that first exercise that you did, and you don't meet and agree the code. You start from the very beginning with already your analytical framework, and which was based on theory, and then just code according to it. But then you can also allow for new codes to emerge if things come about which are not in line with the theory. So that could be a combination of the two, and it does allow for both to happen. And then my last slide, things that to bear in mind though when you're doing it is that being in Excel and being in this framework can sometimes encourage people to quantify the data and say things like 11 of 15 people said this, but that is really never an appropriate thing to do in qualitative analysis, because you're not trying to create a sample that is representative of the whole population. You're just, like I said, trying to get different perspectives. So we never use numbers like that. It can be quite time consuming, especially when you're working in these big teams. But I think that the benefits of working in these teams far outweigh that time consuming or resource intensive nature. And also you need to have training in order to be able to successfully perform it. So this performs some of the training that that NERS team that I said at the beginning are having, but there's also sort of a bigger program of work around that to help them to feel confident in applying this process. But when you do the type of analysis as a team, there should always be sort of an experienced qualitative researcher leading them. But other than that, it's a great thing to do together. So that's the reference for a paper by Gail and colleagues, which is a really nice, accessible paper to read, which has this step-by-step guide within it. It's an open access paper, so anybody can get hold of it, and there's a really nice piece of supplementary document that comes with it, which gives an example of the research that they've done on all the different stages for that particular piece of research, so you can follow through their steps in line with that. But that's the end of the presentation. Apologies for running over 5 minutes. Has anybody got any questions?
Katie, Abby had asked if it'd be possible to see a bit of an example of an Excel spreadsheet with the framework in. I know you'd done that with, for example, well, this physical activity study that you published subsequently. Maybe not that, I don't know, that it's possible to send some of it rather than the whole overwhelming data set or something.
I can share my screen now and show it, or I could send a portion of it afterwards.
I suggested sending a portion of it by email out afterwards.
Yeah, that's fine. I can do that. So there's going to be this recording that we've done. I can also share the slides.
Yeah, I think that would be appreciated.
And then a sort of portion of the framework. Yeah, that's a good idea, so people can see that. What was I going to say? Yeah, I'm not sure whether the university has any sort of repository that we can put the video into. Then people can just have the link to view the video, because I don't really want to send it around on email because it'd be a large file. But I'll look into that, because that would be much better. So yeah, I'll try and send the recording, but I'll definitely send the slides and a copy of the framework as well as an example. Anything else? No? Well, apologies again for running over, and thank you for your attention and your time, and I hope you found it useful.
It was very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Right.
Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.